Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Today's show is brought to you by OnPay, the new standard in payroll. You can pay employees and contractors in minutes, automate your payroll taxes and filings, as well as provide health benefits and HR in all 50 states. For more information, visit buildingthefutureshow.com/onpay. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Jayanth Gummaraju. He's the co-founder and CEO at Banyan. Jayanth, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Banyan Security is actually really innovative and cool, but maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. Yeah, I actually grew up in Bangalore in India. It's one of the, I would say, now it's a much bigger city than it was when I was growing up. It was called the Garden City when I was growing up, and now it's probably more called the IT hub of India, because there have been like so many IT companies have come up, and it's the hub there. So yeah, it was a very different experience than what it is today. So even now when I go back, it feels so different from what it was. So
That's cool. So you went to university. What did you take and why?
yeah, so actually I think I blame my sister a little bit, my older sister. She was in computer science and I always thought it was pretty interesting. And I liked technology a lot growing up. And as I said, one of the main things in Bangalore I saw firsthand was how it was completely transforming the middle class, I would say, in the way people thought about technology and how it influenced people's lives. And so I was always fascinated by it. And then I got the opportunity to, go to this undergrad college in India called BITS Pilani. It's one of the top private institutions there, and study computer science. And so that's what I did. I did my undergrad in computer science, and I would say it was a very interesting experience doing that, because it was, it was literally in the middle of a desert, this particular school. But it was like an oasis in the middle of it, with all kinds of, birds and trees and whatnot. And it was like, hey, okay, you go there to just, be with nature and study. So that's what it was. So it was a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So you get out of university. Walk me through your journey of coming to the States and up until Banyan Security.
Sure. Yeah. So this is, again, something that it was a path that my sister, I think, forged a little bit because she actually came here to the US. And then before, when she graduated from school, and I was like, okay, at some point I need to figure out what I want to do. And I was always fascinated about, what I could do with the technology that I could potentially, whatever I learn, how could I really use it? And I always felt that the best way to do it is, in fact, to kind of get really deep and understand it, right from the bottom, especially computers, right? I want to understand it right from the lowest level of the stack, which is like transistors, all the way to the highest level programming language, and see what it is and why is it and why it was built a certain way and all that. So I was always very fascinated by it. And so once I did my undergrad, I was like, okay, it's time to go and get deeper into it. And US has always been a place that has been, at the forefront of a lot of these technologies in terms of how people have thought about it. And a lot of the innovations actually came from here, as you know very well. So It was, I was fortunate enough to, get into, I came to University of Maryland and did my master's there, and then came to Stanford and did my PhD. And it's been one of those things where, from the very beginning, I've always felt that, understanding something in and out is always going to be the right way to kind of get really comfortable with it then you can figure out like the best way to kind of like use it for the betterment of the world, community, whatnot. So that was kind of the transition, I would say, like how, that was a path basically getting from university to the US and all the way here right now. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey, I would say.
That's awesome. So walk us through your career and coming up with the idea and deciding to actually co-found Banyan.
Yeah. So I think a lot of history for me, at least, goes back to my PhD at Stanford. So at Stanford, I did my PhD working with Professor Mendel Rosenblum. He's, for those of you that don't know, he's actually the founder of VMware.
Oh, wow.
And
Very
he's
cool.
and he's been he's been an inspiration and an advisor to me for the last like almost 2 decades now, and he's
Wow.
been amazing having him there. So that's one of the things. When I was doing a PhD, I was like, I actually got a really close look at how VMware itself was built.
Sure.
I was one of those people that landed up at like at Stanford after the people that started VMware, some of the students. So I was a little late to the game there, but it was fun to see how the company was getting built and what was being done and all that. And what was amazing to me was that how VMware was like, making compute really, really simple and accessible to, kind of, I would say, the masses, right? It was like, before people had to go and, go to a physical machine, press a button, you had a new machine come up, and then you start using it. And VMware completely transformed it, and especially on the data centers and, server side, on the enterprise side, by kind of creating this abstraction that enabled people to, like, on demand, get virtual machines to play with. And that to me was like a eye-opening moment about how the world needs to kind of like start thinking about how things can be consumed more simply than anything else, and that is the one that drives a company to become more successful than anything else. So a lot of those learnings was what initially started piquing my interest about what is the right thing to build. And then I landed up at VMware at some point, and I was actually looking at couple of huge trends that were going on. One was around, the adoption of hybrid and multi-cloud. Like, as you are very well aware, AWS and others started coming in, and people started going into like not just data centers where VMware was dominant, but also into the public cloud environments with, Amazon's AWS and Google Cloud, GCP, and then Microsoft's Azure. So these are all like coming up, and people were actually having applications kind of spread across all these different environments. And these are really distributed and scattered across the whole wide world. And that was one trend on the application side. And on the other side, there was about, the workforce that was getting truly remote, right? And it was like people spread across the whole wide world again. And it was different types of users. It was not just employees anymore. It was also partners, contractors, suppliers, vendors, and so on, that were trying to, access corporate resources. And so VMware also acquired a company called AirWatch around that time to kind of like, show that is actually that's a big trend where we need to kind of figure out what do you do with all this mobile workforce and mobile devices and so on. So I was like looking at all these trends. It was like, and I was contributing in my own way to VMware in so many aspects there. But I was like, these things were a big trigger to see that, okay, maybe it's time to kind of step out and kind of think about it from a clean slate as to what's the right kind of thing to be built out here, for this new world we were going towards. That's when I left VMware and got together with two of my co-founders, Yoshua and Tarun. So again, I've known these guys for about 20 years, I say. That's probably awesome. More.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's the funny part is that Yoshua actually was my mentor actually at HP Labs when I did my internship there. This was like, my, I think, second internship in the US or something, and he was a mentor there. And it was always like, if I ever start a company, it would be someone like him. He brought so much, like distributed systems and, networking and security experience to the mix that it was going to be great to have him when we start anything there. And I've known Tarun again, like also for a very long time, right from the undergrad days. all the way to grad school at Stanford. We overlapped as well. And yeah, he also brought a very different perspective, coming from more, like the mobile background and coming from proxies background and stuff like that, which was very different from the way I was thinking about some of these problems. And so it was, the three of us got together and said, let's build something fun. So that's how we got started.
Cool. So how did you guys come up with the idea? And then did you self-fund the first versions, or walk us through that?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting story too. So it was one of those things where like there are companies that usually that at least my colleagues that left VMware, they raised a lot of money and then they went and built the product, and then after that they kind of grew from there. In our case, it was more like we went to StartX, which was like the Y Combinator but for Stanford people, as like the starting point a little bit. And we got our start there, but to kind of think through this. But we are also, the three of us are ardent builders. We are like, we know how to build stuff. We know how to build scalable systems. We know how to build security. We know how to build it ourselves. So let's just go ahead and do it first, and see what we can actually, and have iterations with the customers to see what resonates and what makes sense. And so that's what we did. We spent the first, we didn't take much money or anything. It was more like we just went and said, okay, let's go build it. For the first couple of years, that's what we did. We called it, you can call it a garage, if you will. We actually used Yoshi's one floor of his apartment. He actually has 2 floors in his apartment, believe it or not, in San Francisco. So we kind of used that floor. We can call it the lower level garage or whatever. And that's where we kind of spent our time in like building out the product and the V1, if you will, and then getting a lot of feedback from customers about like what makes sense and what doesn't, and what is the main problem to be solved. And it was more and more clear that in this market, like we were looking at, like secure access in general and trying to figure out what makes most sense. Because as I said, with these two trends, it was obvious that, access is going to be a big part of the deal moving forward, like connecting these two pieces, right? And the state of the world was to use VPNs. And as you very well know, VPNs is like a 20-year-old technology that just wasn't built for this kind of world, right? It was built for a world where you had, once in a while, a few people sitting at home, like working remotely to connect to their system at work, potentially a VPN gateway, and then from there access their applications, right? And that was, a model that was very well, suited for, like 20 years back when that was the state of the world, right? Where clumsy, and it was just a it just wasn't, thinking about this dynamic and distributed applications and users and stuff. It was just not the way they thought about it when they designed it. And it served its purpose really well. But the problem that has happened is that people are trying to, repurpose it now for this new world. And that is where the problem starts coming in. And so the more interviews we did, the more it was obvious that, the secure, more access and rethought in a completely new manner for this new world is what is really needed. And so that's where we kind of started spending a lot of time about what's the right way to build the system and iterate on it. And so that's what we did. And then we had our first set of paying customers, and only then we went and raised our round. Then we kind of took off.
Got you. So were you guys working full time or doing some contract work, or how did you guys survive before you had paying customers and you were working in one of your co-founders' apartments?
Yeah. So the interesting part is we said, we don't need too much money right now. We are okay with where we are. Let's just go full time into this and building it. And we just, we said we live off our savings basically for the first couple of years to make it happen. It was one of those times where we had to kind of say, how committed are we to building something that we're really passionate about building?
Right.
And, we thought about this optionality of, potentially working somewhere and doing this, but that just doesn't work out very well usually. It's very hard to do it. And especially if you're committed to building something like this, it's important to kind of have your full focus and commitment. So that's why we did it that way.
Got you. No, that makes total sense. So how does Banyan work exactly, and how does a company leverage your technology?
Yeah, sure. So at a very high level, we provide, like employees and third parties secure remote access to the corporate resources without the need to use VPNs. Uh, so the uh, so the way it works is that, like instead of thinking about creating like network-based tunnels, that's what
Mm-hmm.
VPN was, like from your laptop, for example, to your data center, and a colo location, and from there to your applications. It's much more about trying to figure out, like, what makes most sense to give somebody access. Like, for example, it's not just about Kevin getting access to some corporate application. It's about Kevin working on his Windows laptop, that hasn't been patched, sitting in like Starbucks, trying
Interesting.
to access
Sure.
his, your Salesforce application as opposed to your cafeteria application, right? Like, the kind of like bringing the whole context into the mix to figure out like
Interesting.
what exactly you're trying to do. And then the security in the background is going to look at all this and say, okay, based on all this, I'm going to say that Kevin is allowed to access, a cafeteria application, no problem, because there's nothing there. But if he wants to access Salesforce, I want him to be in a much more better security posture. Like,
Okay.
I want you to be completely patched up. I potentially want you to kind of like, be in some certain location if I want you to, and so on, right? So that becomes more like kind of adding context to the mix to kind of allow secure remote access. And so you kind of completely change the ball game in terms of, you don't think about the network anymore. So there's no network smarts. There's no, like reliance on network. The VPNs kind of like, built these private tunnels. And like there's no difference between working from inside the company versus outside the company, because, hey, inside the company, you have a different context, but that context is what's going to get used to allow you access to certain things. But we don't care the fact that you're inside or outside anymore.
Interesting. So
So
so wait, just so I understand you correctly, and this is maybe like a harsh example. So I can use Banyan on an outdated, unpatched, unsecure network at like a public coffee shop and not have to worry about security. You guys handle that, or how does that work?
exactly. Yeah. So it's about, like figuring out, like what we do at the end of the day is to say, based on this security posture, do we allow or not allow access to certain resources in the company?
Got
And
you.
these
Okay.
policies are something that we expose to the IT admins, the security admins, basically, to
Got
kind of
you.
write. So the
Okay.
security admins, yeah, they go and say, okay, I want to take my application set and divvy it up, like irrespective of where the application is running, whether it's an on-premise, it's running on your data center somewhere, whether it's running on like one of these public cloud environments like Azure, AWS, or GCP, or whether it's running as a SaaS application, right, a Salesforce or Workday or whatever. We give the IT admins the ability to kind of like say, okay, what is important to them and what's not, and what's like, you can think of it as a red, yellow, green, like a three tier system, where they can say, okay, these are really sensitive applications, so I want any access to it needs to come from only somebody that belongs to this core group inside the company,
Okay.
right? And then even in that, then after that, they need to have this kind of device posture, right? It
Got
has
you.
to be fully patched, latest version, whatnot, and stuff like that. But on the other hand, if they want to access something less secure, less sensitive, you don't need to have that level of control. So the kind of things like that. So we give this, we kind of make this it's much more an intuitive model, right? Like before,
Yeah.
again, if you think about VPNs, it was about, hey, what is the IP address you're coming from, right?
Yeah.
And what is the network you're trying to connect to? Which virtual public cloud are you trying to connect to? Which VLAN are you trying to connect to? That was the level of questions, and the whole idea here was to completely up level it into something which was much more intuitive. And that's where the technology in general needs to move, right? It needs to move to a place where it's much more, it should be obvious, like what you're trying to do, as opposed to trying to like fit it into the artificial limits of the network and whatnot that people have created.
Sure. Well, you're taking the technical challenges off of the user, right? Because the user's not
Yeah.
always technical, and somebody that's kind of in the space sometimes messing with VPNs and IP addresses
and whatnot based on different operating systems, you can spend 20 minutes or longer just trying to connect, right? Where if I can just start using something right away, obviously based around parameters of what I'm kind of connected to, it really takes away, or it gives the technical and non-technical person freedom to just basically be anywhere, right? Whether it's in the office or remote.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are like, if you think about it, there are like two kinds of users we're talking about, right? One is the security admins that are responsible for setting these policies and stuff, right? And we need to, on one side, make it really simple for them to kind of intuitively set these policies so that they say, if Kevin belongs to the contractor group, he only can get access to this specific application or the specific API and so on, right? So that's one thing about making it simple. The other part is more like what you're talking about as well, which is, like the end users themselves, like the employees, the contractors or whatever, they are using the system, and it has to be completely seamless, right? It has to feel as though, like for lack of better word, I'm going to say security needs to be invisible, right? Like as when they're trying to access things. But at the same time, if there is a problem, then this is where we've kind of done some very interesting work. We said, if there is a problem, then you want them to, be able to see the issue so that they are part of the security solution and they can even potentially self-remediate. Like, for example, let's say you were trying to access, in this example that I gave you before, like trying to access Salesforce application without patching your laptop.
Right.
Imagine something that tells you, hey, I cannot give you access, and just goes away. And then you are now then responsible for filing a ticket, and the IT admin is going to look at it, security admin, and they're going to have like 10 hours of discussion and then, or not, depending on what they're up to. And then finally somebody goes and tells you what's going on. So imagine a completely different world wherein you try to access, and then there is something that's there on your laptop that tells you, hey, I can give you access, but I'm not able to give you because you haven't, updated your laptop in the last, you haven't updated it to this version, which is a minimum version requirement as far as this company is concerned.
Right.
So they could go patch it, and immediately after that, they are completely unblocked. And if you think about it, there's no ticket file, there's nothing filed, it's self-remediation, and they are up and running, right, immediately. And so this, we've taken this concept to we added a lot of layers to it, but it's pretty cool because what we've done is just like, a credit score kind of gives you access to, different levels of mortgage, if you will. We've created a concept called trust score. And this trust score, depending on the score you have, you can get access to the different types of resources. And so the score itself is based on what I told you, it's based on the context of the user of the device. And we also actually integrate with all of the, not all of it, many of the security tooling that's already in the company environment. Most companies already have an identity system. They have some kind of a device management system, some kind of a device, endpoint detection and remediation, EDR kind of systems, SIM systems, and so on. There are so many of them. So imagine something that takes all this information and at the end of the day gives you a score and said, this is your score. And based on this, you have access to these kinds of resources. That's kind of what we built out. So that's been a pretty powerful concept for, end users to see and kind of become part of the solution, right? Like security has always been like, hey, okay, somebody's imposing something on me and I need to go do it.
Right.
This is much more about, this is like flipping the whole thing around and saying, hey, you are actually part of the solution. You want your company to be secure too, not just us, right? So
sure.
let's make it happen. Yeah.
No,
so,
that's
yeah.
So,
yeah, sorry.
So if I'm an enterprise client and I come to Banyan, how long does it take to onboard my company? I get that's really a general question. It could take probably days, weeks, or depending on what I need. But traditionally, how long does it roughly take to actually get my organization using your technology?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So there are, to kind of prove out the concept itself is actually pretty fast. So our technology, I would say, has three pieces. One is an app that you need to put on your laptop. That it's it's available on every app store and whatnot. So it's just a click of a button, you get it there and you're done. The second piece is a SaaS platform that we maintain on our side where the IT admins come in and set policies and stuff. And it's a matter of just creating an account for them so that they can come in and then start writing policies. So that's also very fast.
Okay.
The third piece is what is actually it's something that we deploy in the customer environment. And this is actually something that probably took us the longest time to build as well. What we call the intelligent access tier. So it's basically a set of reverse proxies that get deployed really close to your application that actually are responsible for, guarding access to them, they allow or disallow access. So based on all these constraints we just talked about. And that is also something that we've spent a lot of time. And I think given that you are from the UX background, you probably appreciate it. One of the first people you hired in the company was around UX because it was we wanted to make that part also really, really simple and easy to use. And so we've created things like cloud formation templates and whatnot that make it really simple to press a few buttons and you have this infrastructure as a software basically, right, deployed in your cloud environment. And then once it is there, it just connects back and then things are up and running very quickly. So yeah, I would say and we also integrate with the other part is that as I said, we don't want to become the identity provider and all that, right? So every company already has a system that tracks users and which groups they belong to and all that, right? So that's another place where people need to go and, an admin needs to do it. It's like a 10-minute job, putting it there and saying, okay, integrate with Banyan on it. So yeah, all in all, probably, I would say an hour or two, you should probably at least get going enough to kind of see what the value is.
Okay.
And then, that's the beauty of it, right? That's the other thing. I think what you're trying to get to is also very critical, which is, you want a system that provides more like instant gratification, right? As opposed to something that again, if you think about VPNs, traditional VPNs, it's like, hey, okay, let's go order a server, let's go place it there, then let's have a way to connect to it. And, it's like, oh my God, even if you move it to the software, it's still pretty painful. So this whole thing about, rethinking that and making it in a form that's really easily consumable is like a big chunk of what we did.
Sure. But the problem you're solving is actually really challenging, right? Because you're integrating with a bunch of software that may play nice together, may not play nice together, somewhere in between. And then you guys have to keep up with all those integrations as well, right? And so the problem you guys are solving for companies would require them a huge team of people and constant maintenance and addition of features, right? Because what you guys are, it's actually really complicated, and you guys are simplifying that complexity. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think if somebody, that's the thing, they give you a rough idea of the complexity. Sure. Google actually was one of the first companies that put forth this idea called BeyondCorp. This was back in 2011, where Google said, they actually had, some foreign hackers or whatnot, and they said they're going to move away from VPNs. And so they said, we want to completely change our paradigm. And, these concepts that I'm talking to you about is like something that they also expressed. And it was pretty funny that we did it pretty independent of them, but it actually goes back. And then you look at the papers, there's actually interesting commonality in the way we thought about things. And so they actually completely revamped, and, the numbers are out there, but it probably, took them, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars or something, to kind of get the system in place and build it in a form that kind of works. And so it just shows you how complicated the system can get. And for us, it was, coming from enterprise companies like VMware and stuff, we saw, it's important to build a system that is, that can kind of integrate with all these things very easily. You kind of build knobs and whatnot inside the system so that it's very easy to plug in, right? You kind of build lack of a better word, I'm going to use a platform in some places, right? So that you can actually integrate with all these other, existing security tooling in a very efficient manner. So kind of building that thing out and now being able to, that enables us to completely integrate with things very quickly was a big chunk of the hard problem. And I would say the other part of the big problem was these just building these, the third piece I told you about, the reverse proxies, like making it really lightweight and really easy to deploy, and, kind of like being able to, I think the one part I didn't mention, which is probably the most critical of the whole thing, is we wanted all these things to happen in real time, right? Like it's not even, like it's like, let's say there is on your laptop, there is there is a virus or something that gets detected. We wanted to kind of, as soon as that happens, we wanted the ability to completely cut off your connections to anything that you're currently accessing. So in real time, like, in a matter of seconds. Now, building a system that can actually take these signals and immediately send it to these endpoints that make sense so that it can actually make this happen is a very hard problem to solve. And we have patents around it and all that. So yeah, there were a lot of fun problems that we had to solve to make this a reality. But yeah, you're totally right. If a company tries to do it itself, it's a very, very complicated problem.
No, very cool. So I'm curious, obviously with all what's happening right now, remote work for a lot of companies is the most important thing, and giving the proper access to the proper people and letting people leverage stuff that they would connect to on the office, or sorry, in the office. So how did you guys or how are you guys basically supporting companies in that space, and how do you add and decide what features actually get into the platform? Because you probably get requests all the time to say, we need these 12 features, and they might only need 2 of those or 8 of those, or maybe all of them. So how do you decide what to do when you're trying to support this whole remote working and or back in the office working when things come back to normal or new normal?
Right. So I think there are like two parts of your question. One is around the current situation, the way things have happened and what the implications are. And the second part is about how do we kind of like, decide on what features to add and stuff.
Yeah.
So to answer the first part, it's, like we pitched this thing. We've been working on this for like, 4 years now. And it's, we always, like even last year when I actually did some kind of analysis of what's happening and with remote workforce and stuff, it was about, like 40% to or so of the world's workforce, like there is at least one day of the week that they work remotely from, something like that is what the number that I figured when I looking at a lot of data there. And it was like, okay, the whole pitch was, hey, the world is going more and more remote, like in the last 10 years, it's doubled, it's going to go more and stuff. Now, if you look at it, it's what has happened is basically, been a complete accelerator to the whole thing. Like we were expecting, like, hey, okay, they said it's going to go to like, 50% or whatever, and it's going to keep growing. But now this thing that has happened has completely, I would say, accelerated the pace at which we would probably get there. I'm not saying this is, like people, all of them working remotely, which is right now it's become like a remote only workforce, right, so to speak, right? Is not the new normal, but definitely, like it has changed the way people think about remote workforce, right? And I think you were also talking about how, like working a couple of days a week from home and something like, it's very common for you. But it's even like, even like my wife, for example, used to always go to work. And now the fact that she's seen what you can actually do from home and right, get out of it, it's like, it's completely changed the way she thinks about it. So it's one of those things where I think the world is recognizing more and more that remote workforce is, is the new normal, as you said, right? And so that is a big reason why people, will probably, this whole trend is going to get heavily accelerated with time. And we will, having a solution that actually makes sense is going to be very, very critical. And to top it off, as I said, like VPNs were designed for like 10 to 20% of your workforce working from home, and now it's like the moment it starts shooting through the roof, it's like, oh my God, what are you going to do? And so people are, like from all the stories we hear now are like, hey, they have these emergency licenses and they have these, like they're adding more and more extra VPNs out there to kind of like, handle the load. these are all stopgaps that we are seeing that people are trying to, get by. But there is a more fundamental shift where this, as you said, like it will become the top of mind problem moving forward. And that's going to be a critical bit in terms of like, where companies that are solving this problem are going to experience a lot of interest, I would say, from customers. On the features front, it's much more about, like, yeah, we've kind of built out, I would say, the essential features for people to get started very quickly, right? And I think one of the things that was essential, for example, is the ability to incrementally deploy it. Like, you don't want to go to a company and say, hey, rip out your VPN and put this in. It's a very, very tough. So we kind of like built it out in a form that says, hey, put us in there. You can completely live alongside your VPN, no problem. You just take a couple of applications, move it over here, and then get a few users access to it and see how you feel about it. And like this is what we started with. And one of the companies is like, yeah, we start with 20 users, and 2 weeks later we had like 900 of them on that. So it's one of those things where people see the value in something like this and immediately start transitioning their whole remote workforce to this kind of environment. So that is how I would say the feature building is like, build a minimum thing for them to understand it and get to start using it. And then obviously there are so many integrations and stuff we can figure out more with time, but people are excited to just get everything working in much more easily, much more fast and much more secure manner than it was ever possible before. So yeah, that's been the tack there, the feature sets.
No, fair enough. My next question to you was gonna be, I think, and I've been thinking about this a lot the last couple years, and I would put myself in this boat. I think people nowadays almost don't care about the actual technology, and you could even argue certain people don't even care about the operating system. They just want to use their favorite browser or whatever that is, or piece of software, and they want to click the icon of the app that they need on their desktop, laptop, tablet, or phone, and it just sorts itself out. Like, I want my data to be there. I want to pick up where I left off. I don't really care if it's Windows, Mac, Linux, Chrome OS, Android, iOS. I don't care, right? And I think more and more people are like that. And if security needs to, or if one of those app icons needs to be more secure than another one, then that's the technology's problem. I just want to use what I want to use now, and the tech behind it, I don't care about, right? Like, I get that's like a very general oversimplification, but I think that's the problem you guys are ultimately solving for people, right? Technical and non-technical.
That's like a really, really good point that you're making, and that's exactly the way we envision the world as well. Yeah, it's technology is an enabler, but it has to be something that is under the hood. It's doing its job, right? You don't want it to come in people's faces and stop them, right? Kind of like the word that we started using recently, secure productivity, right? Sure. Like, productivity is the most important thing, right? Because they want to just get to it. They don't want to be frustrated waiting for some, like network connection to go through and, like bad user experience and even doing anything there, right? It's like they just want to get to work. And at the back, so it's critical to think of this as, hey, it's something that's there at the back, making sure the world is kosher, the world is secure and everything. But if you run into problems, that's when you kind of do something there to kind of like, help you resolve it quickly to get back to where you want to be, right? So That's the whole mentality. And kind of like, this is exactly the future, right? Where, technology should just blur into your environment. It shouldn't be something that you think about or even want to do anything with. It should just naturally, play its role. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what we are there for. Like, and at VMware, we used to call ourselves plumbers, right? Like, it's like we do all the plumbing that's needed for A to talk to B and B to talk to C, all that stuff. But you don't see those pipes. You only see A, You just want your job done, right? So that's what the job of a lot of, like yeah, that's exactly right. That's pretty much our job now, to kind of like make it completely seamless.
Sure. Well, and the easier it is for the user, the more work it is for you guys, really, because that's where all the hard stuff
Yeah,
happens, right? Like,
yeah,
and I think
yeah.
people
Sorry.
are getting used to, especially on the mobile OS front of things. There's a lot of times you can't use an app until you update it, right? And that goes back to your point earlier. I think people are so used to saying like, I click my app, it works. If it needs to be updated, or in your case, like maybe you need better security permissions, or I need to update something, it prompts me, right? Instead of putting a support request. So I think what you guys are building is actually really basically where things are have been going and already are, and it's cool to see you guys are kind of at the forefront of that.
Yeah, it's been really exciting too, and I think yeah, that was just, as you were talking about it, I was just thinking, like even the team that we built is like has been exactly like that, because on one side we hired systems people and told them, like this is a really complicated system that you need to make sure it's always available,
Right.
like highly resilient and secure and everything. At the same time, we hired like UX and UI people that are amazing and told them there's so much complexity underneath, but we don't want anything to be visible to the top guys. How do you make it
Totally.
happen? That's your hard challenge. You go solve it.
Yeah.
So I think we've been really fortunate to kind of have some of the top people both on the systems side and the UX UI side. And so that's been, I would say, yeah, building out that kind of a team has been huge for us uh, to make this happen.
Sure. So you guys have been around for a while now, and you kind of been at the forefront of some of this stuff. What advice would you give to younger entrepreneurs that want to get into the security space or other space? What have you learned that you want to maybe pass down to other people that are just kind of starting out, or just getting into the space?
Sure. Yeah. I think a couple of things I would say. One is, keep your, I think this is the theme of this day, I guess, keep your, like, end user in mind, right? Like the
Right.
final user of the product. Like, even though, for example, we sell to, security admins and security architects and director of security and so on, what we need to keep in mind a lot is the final employee or the final, like contractor or whatever that's actually using our system. Because if you think about it, they are actually the real customers of your security admins, right? They are. So kind of like keeping that in mind, like the end user and their experience and what it is so much, so much critical, more critical, especially with the world, the way we are moving towards, especially, I want to blame Apple a little bit for it, but I think that with iPhone, once it came out, everything got so simple and easy, and people loved the way they interacted with it, right? And so
Yep.
that bringing that the thing to security is probably, or even other areas, I'm sure, is the same. It's like that is probably one of the most important things in terms of like how you think about building and what you want to build. And the other aspect I would say is around building the team.
Okay.
Team, it's so it's so important to like be very careful in hiring people and kind of like focusing on the top, like the top A players, I would say, to kind of get into the game, because you bring in A players and they'll bring in other A players with them, right? So
Right.
yeah, so keep that in mind, because it's so tempting many times to, hey, okay, I just want this one thing done and I think I can get this person that can do it, even though that person is not the best. It's like it's very tempting, but you need to always kind of like step back and say, okay, it might give you the short-term benefit, but the long term, it's going to be, it may not be the right decision, right? So yeah, those are a couple of things I would say. It's probably really, really critical to get right in the starting of a company.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But we're kind of coming to the end of the show, so how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about you guys, and any other links you want to mention?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. So our website is www.banyansecurity.io. And yeah, we have a lot of information there. And yeah, you can, yeah, we are actually currently, due to coronavirus and stuff like that, we are also offering a free usage of our product so
Okay,
that people
cool.
can just start using it and then see for themselves, like how it can really help them. And we're not, like charging anything, and it's totally your call later once everything is done. whether you want to keep it or, go back to where you were before. So, but this is like our way of, I guess, paying back a little bit to the community too. This is, so the website has all the information, and you can always, we also have information there to reach us at any point, and we're all like very active in responding to people, whether it is, Slack or just in text or whatever. So absolutely do reach out there.
Very cool. And your free usage button is blue on the top right hand corner on your homepage.
Yeah,
so exactly. Check it out.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you. And have a good rest of your day, man.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and thanks again. It's always a pleasure to talk to people like you. Thanks.
You as well. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.